Welcome and happy Friday to the Transformation Perspective. This is episode 3. We are going to dive in to the very first issue, and the number one issue that Americans have concerns for is the economy today. So today's episode is called The Middle Class: Wages versus Rent Costs. So let's do a quick update about this week that we've had, because it has been wild and crazy since I did this special report of Biden dropping out of the Democrat nominee position. It looks like Vice President Harris is going to be the presumptive nominee. She has several endorsements from lead Democrats out there, former presidents, as well as the current president's endorsement. She has raised nearly, I think, over 100 million or close to 100 million dollars in less than a week's time. Also having the best access to the campaign funds that Biden had. This week has seems to energize the Democratic voters out there. She gave her very first campaign stop speech that was already pre-scheduled in Wisconsin on Tuesday. And the central message that she gave was kind of laying out her vision for the week, which my previous episode I talked about like vision and investment in the future. And it seemed like the Democrats didn't have one with Biden. This is a good thing for the Democrats now, is at least Harris has some plan, some vision for the future. Here are her top, looks like 5 or 6 things she addressed in the campaign stop in Wisconsin. Number one, obviously, is abortion rights. She's a big advocate for that. She's going to push it. That's the top of her agenda. Also, other two things: paid family leave and affordable child care. These two issues I brought up in a previous episode about something that needs to be laid out for America is that if you're going to have this idea of pro-life versus pro-choice and you're going to restrict abortion access, then you need some kind of measures in place. By having family leave, paid family leave in place, as well as affordable child care vision, that is going to make a big difference, right? She's also for having every worker having access to unions. She laid out wanting to have affordable health care, because it seems like Trump and the conservatives want to roll back health care measures if they get elected. And lastly is gun control measures. So more background checks, universal background checks, restrictions on certain guns you can purchase. This is obviously the flip side to Second Amendment conservative movement, that you have the right to bear arms and everyone should have the right to have a gun. So those are kind of the visions that Harris has laid out. Does not seem like there's any challengers, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be a challenger now, even though I said that I think there should be. Yeah, that's my perspective. That's what I thought. We have a short time period. We are 3 months away from the election. So this is going to be a quick turnaround. So it'll be interesting. So stay tuned. I'll give you some updates if some major things happen. But let's dive in to this episode about the middle class and the economy, because the economy is such a big, important issue. Was a recent poll that I've seen was somewhere around 40% to 50% Americans think that is a number one issue, on top of being immigration. And immigration is another issue we're going to get to. But economy, I wanted to address first and foremost. So today we're talking about wages and rent costs. I was at work this week talking to some coworkers, and they were saying that they were really concerned that their wages haven't gone up, and they really want their wages to go up because they can't afford the $1,200, the $1,300, the $1,400 rent costs, or more than that, right? Rent is ridiculous right now. I'm not even touching the base on buying a home right now. That market is incredibly hot. Is a seller's market, and interest rates for getting a loan right now are still around 6.5% to 7%. So it's not really the best affordable aspect. So housing is a big number one issue that I felt like I should address here in this episode. So let's kind of look at some statistics that I pulled from Forbes. And these statistics range from May of 2023 to February of 2024. And with that, let's look at some aspects here. The income for Americans I pulled, rent, average monthly rent in America, and also the value of $100 and that purchasing power it holds in America in this current time. So let's look at some statistics here because the data points are so key to understand. I think a lot of people freak out about numbers like I just tune out. Trust me here, knowing the data points are so key to understanding the issues. Remember, knowledge is power. Enthusiasm pulls that switch, right? The lack of education, the lack of knowledge you have going into election, it's really hard to differentiate between the two parties that they're proposing. So let's go through some numbers here. The annual average gross income for America as of 2023 was $62,027. That comes out to be a monthly gross of $5,169. We know we don't live off our gross because we have taxes. So we take about roughly about 25% off for federal, state, Social Security, and Medicare expenses. This leaves you with Americans an average of $46,520 for the entire year. That gives you, for Americans on average, net income. This is your disposable income that you can use to pay for bills, your groceries, and any other disposable aspects that you might have. So, monthly net income is $3,877. Okay, not bad. However, let's look at the cost of living expenses in America on average right now. The average cost of living expenses per year in America, according to 2023 data point, was $40,467. That's a lot. Remember, I said the monthly net income was $46,520. That leaves you with only $6,053 as disposable income. Let's break it down by month. That's an average cost of living expense of $3,372 on top of your net income, leaving you only with $505 of disposable income. These are cost of living expenses. This is not any debt that you have to pay, like student loans or credit card debts or maybe a car loan. These are just your cost of living expenses of like food, housing, miscellaneous expenses that you might have around the house, like your other stuff that you need. Okay. It's a lot. So not much disposable income on top of if you have student loan debts or any kind of other debts that you have. So if you're familiar with budgeting aspects, I teach economics and I teach personal finance. And one of the rules I teach my students is about a 25 to 30% ratio that you should try to set aside for budgeting for housing costs. That would be rent or your mortgage. So if we use that data, Americans' monthly net income, right? Our rent should be averaging between $969 and $1,163. That's where rent should fall in. Drum roll, please, on what the average rent is for America as of 2023. It was a staggering $1,279. So my coworker who's saying that they have to pay $1,200 is pretty spot on of what their expense is. It's ridiculously expensive for housing. That means Americans are paying roughly around an average of 33% of their net income per month, right? For just the rent. Like I said, I did not calculate mortgage costs, just rent. Okay. So that totals to a rent cost of $15,354. That's 37.94% of the total cost of living expenses. Remember that cost of living expense was $40,467, right? Almost 2/5 of your disposable income is going to housing costs. That's a lot of money. Not much disposable income to invest back in the economy, even though the latest report, the economy is doing really, really well. But Americans don't feel that. And these numbers start to show why Americans think, yeah, inflation's bad, prices is bad, the economy is doing bad. But if you look at the data points, they're doing really good. So that leads me to this concept that you've got, that this is kind of mind-blowing. 49 out of 50 states, okay, are above that 25% threshold ratio of budgeting for your monthly housing rent costs. North Dakota is the only state of the 50 states that is below that 25% ratio for housing expenses that you should be budgeting for. They're roughly around 28 point, or not 20, sorry, my bad, 23.8%, right? Still up there, but it's below. That's what you want to target. Here's another mind-blowing statistic. 40 out of 50 states, that's 80% of the nation, have rent costs over the 30% budget line, right? Expenses. That's 10 out of 50 states, right? The other 20% are within that budget range you've got. That's not a very warm, fuzzy, yeah, the economy's doing great kind of vibe that you're getting, right, America? So those are the things. Now let's look at your purchasing power of your disposable income. Remember, you said about $505. That's if you don't have any debts. Disposable income. How far does this purchasing power get per $100? So if we break this down, this is what it states by the data I pulled. The value of $100 captures how much 100 George Washingtons are worth in the state. The value of the dollar drops below 100, then it does not go as far in that state anymore. So you have less purchasing power if it's below 100. You have more purchasing power with that 100 if it's above the 100 threshold. This data was collected in February of 2024. So very, very recently, 5 months ago. The national average, drum roll once again, is $103.08. Yay, America, our $100 value goes further. That's good. However, 18 out of 50, that's 36% of the states, the $100 value of purchase power is less than the $100. That means things are way too expensive for people to buy things. Your $100 doesn't go as far anymore. So now we kind of see some data points within why the economy is the number one issue for Americans. You have Trump proposing we need to have tariffs on imported goods because we need to do things in America. Well, tariffs are only going to drive up prices because it's those costs of those tariffs are passed on to the consumer, not the other country. Okay. To build American, great idea. However, then you have to pay the Americans to build that, which then corporations tend to up those costs. So then the costs are good. So then the wages have to go up, and we keep having this weird snowball reverse effect where things just keep going up. Trump also wants to drill, baby, drill, right? To lower fuel costs. Everyone's excited about that. Yeah, we're tired of paying $3, $4, $5, $6 per gallon. Yeah. However, if you drill, the value of the barrel of oil drops and companies stop producing. If you understand supply and demand, if you oversupply the market and they don't want to produce it to the demand, the price stays high because the demand is high. Gasoline is inelastic. It does not change that well. Okay. So these kind of things it's not an economic plan. And I don't think the Democrats have one either. Harris didn't play that out. So that I'm just showing data points, and I'm going to dive into that next week and probably the week after that. What's the vision? How are you going to fix this? Trump also wants to roll back taxes on corporations. And then that's supposed to help the working class because then the trickle down effect is our wages go up. That's not what happened. And this is where I'm going to leave you for today on that note, which is going to get me into next week's episode, looking at this middle class more closely and the wages and how they've gone the wrong way. So here's a data point. After the longest period in history without an increase in federal minimum wage, right? Today, that minimum wage is worth 27%. 27% less than it was 13 years ago. 13 years ago was 2011. We are coming out of the Great Recession, right? Last minimum wage hike, I do believe, was in let me just pull up my statistics here. Yeah, 2009, right before the Great Recession. It's been 15 years. It's 27% less valued now. Here's the staggering things. The minimum wage today, calculated by inflation, is worth 40%. That's a 4 with a 0. 40% less of the value the minimum wage was in 1968, nearly 60 years ago. That is where I'm going to start next week's episode, is why 1968 economically was the most prosperity in American history when it came to wages. And after that, things went south for America's wages, right? So that's where I'm going to leave you. Once again, get out and vote. Please, 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 please get out and vote. You have primaries that are going on right now. You have like Senate races, House races. You have initiatives on there. You have referendums. Maybe you have school boards that are up for election, school board or school referendums, whatever it might be. Get out and vote. Find your local elections. Do not stay home just because it's not the general election. Go out and vote. Exercise your right. The election is November 5th. It is fastly approaching. Early voting begins really soon. Democratic National Convention is in like 3 weeks. So everything is coming really quickly. Get out and vote. Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode. I really appreciate all the viewers. And we'll see you next week for episode 4. Thanks. Bye. Have a good weekend.